Once again, we have a question that is definitely emphasizing the answer choices more than the passage. The question is really not a question at all. It's just telling us go to the passage, find out what the claim is. So let's go ahead and start by doing that. Okay, Walt Whitman, blah, 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 essay. Okay. In the essay, Marti explores the value of literature, arguing that a society's spiritual well-being depends on the character of its literary culture. So spiritual well-being and literary culture are connected. So that's what I'm looking for. Anything about those ideas is going to be good. Choice A. Poetry, which brings together or separates, which fortifies or brings anguish, which shores up or demolishes souls, which gives or robs men of faith and vigor, is more necessary to a people than industry itself. For industry provides them with a means of subsistence, while literature gives them the desire and strength for life. This is a lot. This is quite the claim here. But what do I see? Okay, they're talking about poetry and literature. So that seems to check off the literary culture aspect of this. They're talking about a people. So that seems to be society. Spiritual well-being. Well, strength for life, I guess, could be a spiritual well-being. Honestly, I barely understand this, but it's got a lot of the same ideas. You know, they're changing the words a little bit, but those ideas seem to be there. So I don't know. This seems like it could be right. Let's just see if anything else is checking off these same boxes. B, every society, brings to literature its own form of expression, so literature, and the history of the nations can be told with greater truth by the stages of literature than by chronicles and decades. Well, let's talk about history, but not spiritual well-being, right? It's got to be about what the people are kind of experiencing and feeling. This is history. That's not quite the same thing. So I feel like I'm missing a piece for this choice. C, where will a race of men go when they have lost the habit of thinking with faith about the scope and meaning of their actions? Okay, thinking with faith, that might be it. The best among them, those who consecrate nature with their sacred desire for the future, will lose in a sordid and painful annihilation all stimulus to alleviate the ugliness of humanity. Okay, well, maybe this is about spiritual well-being. Maybe it's about, like, society, the race of men. But I don't see anything about literature or culture. It's about nature. It's not the same thing. So this also feels like it's missing a part. Let's look at D. Listen to the song of this hardworking and satisfied nation. Listen to Walt Whitman. The exercise of himself exalts him to majesty, tolerance, exalts him to justice, and order to joy. Okay, well, maybe the nation is important, but again, nothing about, I mean, literature might be Walt Whitman, but it sounds like it's about the spiritual well-being of Walt Whitman. The exercise of himself exalts him to majesty. Tolerance exalts him to justice, and order to joy. Okay. Maybe that means something. This is a good example of, like, I barely understand any of this. This writer who wrote this essay sounds terrible. Like, he just sounds like he's very full of himself, writing about big ideas, and none of them make any sense. But of course, we don't have the full essay, so it shouldn't make that much sense. So we really have to go by just like what we're given here. I really like that A is more direct, right? It says poetry, it says literature, it says it's necessary to a people, right? It gives or robs men of faith and vigor, right? So they're talking about their spiritual well-being, faith, vigor, souls, right? Demolishes souls. So it's talking about, like, how poetry specifically affects them. And, a people is just a way of talking about a society, right? Like, a nation does that too, but A just seems more direct. And if you're ever kind of in this position where you barely understand what you're reading, you have to think of it like, okay, the question is giving me 3 check boxes, and I want my answer choice to check off all 3, or to check off 2 of the 3 if possible, right? So in this case, the 3 check boxes are: we need to talk about literature, we need to talk about spiritual well-being, and we need to talk about how the society kind of deals with both. And I think choice A checks off all 3 boxes in some way, whereas choice D, I'm kind of like, maybe Walt Whitman is literature, and maybe, like, joy is the spiritual well-being. But again, who's the him here? The exercise of himself? Is that Whitman? I don't know. Like, this just feels a little bit more of a stretch. And so sometimes this will happen, And my advice is kind of just like trust your gut a little bit. If something feels like you have less effort to get it to connect with the question or the passage, that's the one to pick. Less effort, kind of gut reaction, common sense, the things that kind of just seem more obvious probably are right. You might fall into a trap occasionally, but honestly, with the reading sections, you don't have the time to decide. You got to move quickly. So if you got to pick quickly, but for some reason, then let that reason just be that something feels right, and that's better than nothing and running out of time and not getting to some easy questions at the end. So A is the answer here. I would probably have marked this one for review if it were me, but I would still be about 70% sure that A is right, even in the moment. And it's because I'm kind of trusting my gut that the connections are easier to make.